Hey everyone, and welcome back. We're diving deep today
Yeah.
into ideas that are surprisingly relevant if you're tackling international relations. Especially, if you're a UPSC aspirant, we're going to be unpacking Marxism.
Oh, cool.
Well, not the whole thing,
Right.
just the
Yeah.
parts that pop up, on the IR syllabus. And in those intense interviews.
Makes sense.
Yeah. So get ready to think
Mm-hmm.
about power, economics, global systems, that kind of thing.
It is fascinating, even though Marx was writing, back in the 19th century?
Yeah.
Many of his ideas about those very things
Mhm.
still resonate in today's world.
They really do.
Yeah.
And to help us unpack all of this, we've got a super helpful, albeit dense, academic text as our guide.
Great.
So buckle up. First stop, women and the gender question. Now, Marx himself, he didn't actually spend a ton of time on this, on women's roles.
Right.
But his colleague, Engels, he really dug into it.
Yeah.
Engels linked the development of what we call patriarchy, which is essentially the systematic subordination of women to the idea of private property.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So Engels argued that as society shifted
Mm.
from communal ownership to private property, women's status changed. They went from, having a more equal role in society to being seen as dependent on men.
Really?
And he argued that this shift wasn't natural or anything, preordained,
Right.
but a result of, evolving social and economic structures.
So hold on. This isn't just some historical tidbit, right?
Right.
How might this idea of women's subordination being linked to economic systems,
Yeah.
how might that play out in modern international relations?
That's a great question. Think about the debates that we see today, about women's access to things like education, employment, and political participation
Mhm.
in various parts of the world. Engels' analysis can give us a framework for understanding how economic structures and policies, too, can either perpetuate or challenge gender inequalities on a global scale. It helps us see that gender equality, it isn't just a social issue. So
It's deeply intertwined with economic development and international relations.
that makes a lot of sense, especially when we consider things like the UN's Sustainable Development Goals,
Exactly.
which highlight gender equality as, crucial for global development. This is something to keep in mind, I think, for those UPSC essays.
Oh, for sure.
Speaking of bold ideas, let's move on to a concept that's stirred up a lot of controversy,
Oh, okay.
the Asiatic mode of production.
This is where we see some of the limitations and biases within Marx's own thinking. This model essentially categorized Asian societies, particularly India and China, as stagnant.
Really?
Yeah, and lacking the internal dynamics.
Yeah.
For historical progress, it was based on the idea that these societies were stuck in this loop, of unchanging traditions and were incapable of self-generated development.
Oh, wow. It almost sounds like they were seen as, frozen in time.
Yes, and that perception was heavily influenced by, well, think about it, the European colonial mindset of the time.
Right. The Asiatic mode of production is, now widely criticized for being Eurocentric, for imposing a European model of development on very different societies, and for ignoring the complexities and rich histories of these regions.
So how does all of this relate to the UPSC IR syllabus?
Well,
It seems like understanding these critiques is, vital, right, for analyzing those historical narratives.
absolutely. This example highlights the importance of critically examining theories
Right.
and understanding their historical context. For UPSC aspirants, this means not taking any theory, at face value,
Okay.
but questioning its assumptions and considering its potential biases. It also underscores the importance of understanding the diversity of cultures and historical experiences, in shaping international relations.
Okay, so we've talked about Engels' work
Yeah.
and this controversial Asiatic mode of production. Now let's get into Marx on India specifically.
Sure.
How did Marx view the impact of British colonialism on the subcontinent?
Marx saw British colonialism in India as having a dual nature.
Okay.
On one hand, he recognized its brutally destructive aspects,
Right.
the exploitation of resources, the destruction of indigenous industries, and the disruption of traditional social structures. But he also used the term regenerative to describe some of its effects.
Regenerative. That sounds almost positive.
Well, Marx argued that British colonialism, however brutal, also introduced elements of modernity to India, like railways, a free press, and a new education system.
Wow.
He believed that these elements, though imposed by colonial rule, would ultimately contribute to India's development and eventual liberation. Of course, this view is highly debated.
It sounds like a very complex argument.
It is.
On the one hand, acknowledging the devastation of colonialism, but on the other, seeing some potential for progress. How should a UPSC aspirant approach this kind of complexity?
The key is to analyze the evidence from various perspectives
Right.
and form your own conclusions. Consider the economic and social consequences of British rule in India, both positive and negative.
And think about how this historical period continues to shape India's position in the world today. These are the types of insights that can really make your UPSC answers stand out.
That's really helpful advice for anyone prepping for those tough exams. But before we go any further, let's take a step back and address the elephant in the room.
Okay.
The critiques of Marxism.
Ah, yes. Important to remember that, No theory is perfect.
Right.
And Marx's ideas
Yeah.
have been subjected to, well, some pretty intense scrutiny over the years.
Yeah.
We have thinkers like Max Weber, Karl Popper,
Mm-hmm.
and Isaiah Berlin, who have raised some fundamental issues with Marx's theories.
So let's start with Weber. What were his main criticisms?
Weber argued that Marx focused too heavily on economic factors, in explaining social change.
Okay.
He pointed out that things like religion, culture, and ideas also play, a huge role in shaping history
Right.
and influencing how societies function.
That seems pretty relevant to international relations.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we see it all the time, how those cultural and religious differences, how they can spark conflict or influence those diplomatic relations.
Precisely. Weber's critique reminds us that to truly understand global politics, we need to consider, a wider range of factors than just economics. He also questioned Marx's concept of historical determinism.
Okay, wait. What's historical determinism again? I feel like I hear that term all the time, but I'm not always sure I fully grasp it.
It's the idea that historical events unfold in a predetermined way, driven by certain economic forces, and leading inevitably towards a specific outcome. In Marx's case, a communist revolution.
Right.
Weber argued that this view of history, as this one-way street, was too rigid.
Yeah.
He believed that humans, we have agency, that our choices and actions can influence the course of history, and that predicting the future with absolute certainty is, impossible.
So more free will, less predetermined destiny.
Exactly.
That makes sense to me. How does this critique of historical determinism impact how we might apply, Marxist theory to international relations today?
Well, for one thing, it cautions us against making sweeping predictions about the future, based solely on economic trends.
Okay.
The world's a complex place, and there are always multiple forces at play. Even though we can analyze trends and those power dynamics through a Marxist lens, we should avoid, I think, falling into the trap of thinking that history has a predetermined endpoint. It's a good reminder for anyone studying international relations to stay, flexible in their thinking.
Right.
And to be open to unexpected twists and turns.
I'm already starting to see how these critiques are, they're sharpening my analytical skills.
Good.
Okay, so we've got Weber, questioning Marx's focus on economics and his idea of historical determinism.
Right.
What about Karl Popper?
Yeah.
What were his main criticisms?
Popper was all about what he called falsification. He argued that. For a theory to be truly scientific, it has to be open to being proven wrong.
Okay.
It must be falsifiable.
Interesting.
In Popper's view, some aspects of Marxist theory, particularly its predictions about the inevitable downfall of capitalism, were not falsifiable. They were more like, prophecies than scientific predictions.
So it's not enough to just come up with like a grand theory.
Right.
You have to be able to test it.
Exactly.
And it has to be open to, being challenged by evidence. I can see how this is relevant to anyone studying IR for the UPSC.
For sure.
You're constantly having to analyze those complex situations, way different perspectives, and make judgments about, which theories or explanations are the most convincing.
Exactly. Popper's emphasis on falsification, it encourages us to be, skeptical.
Yeah.
To question assumptions and to look for evidence. That might contradict our initial beliefs. It's about being willing to revise our understanding of the world, as new information comes to light.
Speaking of questioning assumptions, wasn't there another thinker, Isaiah Berlin?
Yes.
Who also had some pretty strong critiques of Marxism.
Yes, Berlin was a fierce defender of individual liberty
Okay.
and pluralism. He saw Marxism, particularly in its totalitarian forms, as a threat to individual freedom and the diversity of human values. He was deeply critical of what he saw as utopian social engineering.
What's that?
The idea that a perfect society could be created through, well, top-down control and the suppression of individual differences.
So Berlin was more about embracing like individual freedom and the messiness of democracy.
Yes.
Rather than striving for a single, supposedly perfect societal model.
Precisely. And this critique is especially relevant to international relations, where we see this constant tension between the desire for order and stability on the one hand, and the need to respect the sovereignty and cultural differences of individual nations on the other.
This is all making me think about how important it is to approach any theory, whether it's Marxism or realism or liberalism, with a critical eye. We need to understand its strengths and weaknesses, its blind spots and its insights, in order to apply it effectively to understanding the world around us.
That's the essence of critical thinking.
Yeah.
And it's an essential skill for anyone who wants to succeed in the UPSC.
Right.
Especially in the, well, highly competitive field of international relations.
Okay, we've spent a lot of time on these critiques.
Yeah.
But it's clear that Marx's thought still has a lot to offer.
Yeah.
Even if we don't, take it as gospel truth.
Absolutely.
So let's shift gears a bit and explore where Marxist ideas have been particularly insightful. When it comes to understanding international relations, one area that comes to mind is the way Marxism helps us understand, well, the dynamics of global capitalism.
Yeah, absolutely. Marx's analysis of capitalism as a system, driven by the pursuit of profit and the accumulation of capital, remains a powerful lens through which to view the global economy. And this lens helps us understand the power dynamics between nations, the inequalities inherent in global trade, and the often exploitative nature of global production systems.
So we're talking about concepts like a concentration of wealth and power in the hands of multinational corporations.
Yes.
The exploitation of labor in developing countries.
Yeah.
And the way those global financial institutions can sometimes act in ways that benefit, the wealthy and powerful.
Yeah.
At the expense of the poor and vulnerable.
Precisely. Think about the role of organizations like the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund.
Okay.
While they're often presented as, neutral arbiters of the global economy, a Marxist perspective might lead you to question whether they perpetuate existing power structures and inequality.
Instead of mitigating them.
Exactly.
I see what you mean. It's like Marxism gives you a different set of questions to ask, a different way of seeing those power dynamics, playing out beneath the surface of things. I can imagine how useful that kind of perspective would be, when analyzing things like international trade agreements or the impact of globalization on those developing countries.
Absolutely. And this is where it gets really relevant for UPSC aspirants. Consider, for instance, the ongoing debates about trade wars, protectionism, and the role of China in the global economy. A Marxist perspective could help you understand the motivations of different actors, the potential consequences of their actions, and the underlying tensions that drive those conflicts.
That's a great example. It's like Marxism provides this framework.
It does.
For understanding how those economic forces can shape
political decisions.
Yes. And international relations on a global scale.
Exactly. And this understanding is essential for anyone who wants to excel in the UPSC.
Right.
Particularly in the realm of international relations. After all, the UPSC exam, it's not just about memorizing facts and theories.
Right.
But about demonstrating your ability to think critically, to analyze complex situations, and to apply your knowledge to, real-world issues.
Okay. I'm starting to feel like I'm getting, a crash course in how to think, like a top-scoring UPSC candidate.
I like that.
But let's get even more specific.
Okay.
Can you give us a real-world example of how a Marxist perspective might be applied to analyze a contemporary international relations issue?
Certainly. Let's consider the issue of climate change, a traditional realist perspective might focus on. The competition between states for resources and influence in a changing climate. However, a Marxist perspective would delve deeper,
Right.
examining how the capitalist system itself, with its emphasis on endless growth in consumption, has contributed to the ecological crisis that we face today.
So instead of just looking at like how countries are jockeying for position in a climate change world, we're looking at how, well, the very system we live in might be driving us toward that cliff edge.
Exactly. A Marxist analysis might also examine how climate change disproportionately impacts the most vulnerable populations, often in the global south, who have contributed the least to the problem but bear the brunt of its consequences.
That brings up that whole issue of like climate justice,
Right.
which is a huge topic in international relations today. And it's a perfect example of how a Marxist perspective can help us see the connections between what seemingly separate issues like environmentalism, economics, and global inequality.
Precisely. It helps us see climate change, not just as an environmental issue, but as a social and economic one, deeply intertwined with global power structures and inequalities. And this kind of nuanced understanding is precisely what the UPSC examiners are looking for.
This is all starting to click into place. It's like Marxism provides this whole new set of lenses to view the world.
And that's precisely what we're aiming for in this dope dive. We want to equip you with the analytical tools and critical thinking skills you'll need to excel in your UPSC journey, particularly in tackling those intricate international relations questions.
Speaking of tools, our source text also delves into some fascinating debates within Marxist thought itself, particularly when it comes to analyzing non-European societies.
Ah, yes. The contentious concept of the Asiatic mode of production, as we discussed earlier, this model, with its emphasis on the supposed stagnation of societies like India and China, has been heavily criticized for its Eurocentrism and its oversimplification of complex historical reality.
But didn't Marx himself eventually move away from this rigid model as he delved deeper into understanding the complexities of colonialism and the dynamics of global capitalism?
That's a point of debate among scholars. However, it's crucial to understand that Marx's thought evolved over time, and his later writings, particularly those on colonialism, exhibit a greater sensitivity to the specific historical and cultural context of non-European societies.
So rather than trying to fit all societies into, one single rigid model, we need to appreciate the unique dynamics at play in different parts of the world.
Precisely. And this is where understanding debates within Marxism itself becomes crucial. It encourages us to engage critically with the theory, recognizing its limitations and adapting its insights to the specific context we're analyzing. This ability to apply theoretical concepts in a nuanced and context-specific way is a key skill that the UPSC examiners will be looking for.
This is making me rethink how I approach studying IR. It's not just about memorizing theories. It's about understanding their strengths and weaknesses and applying them thoughtfully to analyze the world around us.
That's the heart of critical thinking, and it's precisely what will set you apart as a UPSC aspirant.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground.
We have.
But there's still one crucial question we haven't fully addressed. If Marxism offers such a powerful critique of capitalism, does it also offer any viable solutions to the problems it identifies?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's one that has sparked, countless debates and inspired a wide range of social and political movements.
So what's the answer? Does Marxism offer a roadmap for a better world? Or is it just a way of critiquing what we have?
Well, as with most things in life, there's no easy answer. Marx himself didn't lay out like a detailed blueprint for a socialist society. He believed that the specific form socialism would take would emerge organically from the struggles and experiences of the working class.
So it's not like there's this step-by-step guidebook to creating a, Marxist utopia.
Not exactly, but Marx did offer some general principles, like the abolition of private property, the social ownership of the means of production, and the establishment of, a classless society based on the principle of from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs.
Those sound like pretty radical ideas.
They are.
Especially in today's world. It's hard to imagine how those principles could be put into practice on a global scale.
They certainly are. And the practical implementation of these ideas has been the subject of intense debate and experimentation with varying degrees of success and failure.
Think about, like, the Soviet Union China, Cuba, all those experiments, right? In applying Marxist ideas,
Right.
each with its own unique trajectory and set of outcomes.
Yeah.
It's a lot to think about.
It is. They certainly provide a lot of, well, food for thought for anyone trying to figure out
Right.
whether and how
Right.
Marxist ideas can be translated into, well, viable political and economic systems.
Precisely. And those historical experiences offer valuable lessons for anyone grappling with the question of, well, whether and how Marxist ideas can be translated into viable political and economic systems. It's important to remember that the world is constantly changing and evolving. What might have seemed like, a viable solution in the past might not be applicable in the present.
Right.
And new challenges require, I guess, new approaches.
They do.
So it's not just about theory.
Right.
It's about understanding how these ideas have played out in the real world.
Exactly.
And about being willing to adapt and adjust those ideas as the world changes.
Exactly. And that's why studying history, particularly the history of socialist experiments, is so crucial for anyone interested in understanding the potential and the pitfalls of, well, applying Marxist ideas to real-world problems. And it's essential for developing those critical thinking skills that are so valued.
The UPSC exam. This is making me realize that understanding Marxism is like opening a door to a whole new way of seeing the world, with all its complexities and contradictions.
And that expanded perspective is precisely what we aim to foster in this deep dive. We want to equip you with the intellectual tools to not only analyze the world, but to imagine alternative possibilities.
That's a powerful thought, and one that's, well, particularly relevant, right, for UPSC aspirants.
It is.
Who will be tasked with, shaping the future of India's role in the world.
Indeed. So as we move towards the final part of our deep dive, keep this question in mind. How might Marxist ideas, even with their limitations and controversies, provide insights for navigating the challenges and opportunities of the 21st century?
That's a question that, well, deserves serious pondering. And a great cliffhanger to leave our listeners with.
We'll delve deeper into that question and more in our final segment. Stay tuned.
Welcome back, everyone, to the final part of our deep dive into Marxism, where we've been exploring its relevance for understanding, international relations, especially for you, our ambitious UPSC aspirants.
We've journeyed through Marx's core ideas, tackled some hefty critiques, and explored how those theories can help us unpack, well, complex issues like global capitalism and even climate change. But the big question that's been looming throughout this whole deep dive is this.
What is the enduring relevance of Marxism in the 21st century?
Yeah. I mean, we're not living in a world of clear-cut ideological battles between, capitalism and communism. Not anymore. Things are way more complex now.
Right.
And interconnected. So is Marxism just like an interesting historical artifact?
Right.
Or does it still have something to offer us today?
That's a question. That sparked, well, a lot of debate.
Yeah.
And for good reason. The 20th century saw those grand socialist experiments, inspired by Marx, rise and often fall.
Right. The 21st century presents a different landscape, but I think what we've seen in our deep dive is that dismissing Marx altogether would be a mistake.
Yeah, I agree. It feels like we've just scratched the surface of how his ideas can help us understand the world, even if we don't, subscribe to every single aspect of his theories.
Exactly. Well, some argue that classical Marxism might not offer like a clear-cut roadmap for political change in our current world. Its analytical framework and its critique of power structures remain remarkably relevant.
It's like Marx gave us this powerful set of lenses.
He did.
To see through the surface of things, to understand how power, especially economic power, shapes so much of global politics.
Precisely. And that's incredibly valuable for aspiring diplomats and policymakers. It encourages us to think critically about, who benefits from certain policies, who's being marginalized, and what hidden economic motives might be driving those global conflicts.
That's a crucial skill for anyone navigating the world of, international relations.
It is.
Or, well, just trying to make sense of the world.
Right. It's about asking the tough questions, not just accepting things at face value.
And beyond that,
yes,
Marxism offers valuable insights into some of the biggest challenges we face today. Global inequality, the exploitation of labor in those global supply chains, and the complex impacts of globalization.
Yeah.
These are issues that are like front and center in international relations today.
They are. For example, the debates we see around fair trade,
Right.
labor rights, and the impact of those free trade agreements on developing countries.
Yeah.
Those feel like areas where a Marxist perspective could really illuminate things.
It's like Marxism. Helps us connect the dots between all these seemingly separate events and see those larger patterns of global power and inequality.
Precisely. It gives us a framework for understanding how economic force, political decisions, and social structures are all intertwined on a global scale. And this ability to see the interconnectedness of things is incredibly valuable for anyone working in international relations or just trying to make sense of the world.
So even if we're not aiming for a communist revolution, understanding Marx can still be a really powerful tool for analyzing the world and for shaping more equitable and just policies.
I couldn't have said it better myself. And there's another key takeaway from Marx that I think is especially relevant today. The idea that the world is not static, that it's constantly evolving through processes of, struggle and change.
That really resonates, especially now when we're facing all these unprecedented challenges, climate change, technological disruption, shifting global power dynamics. It can feel overwhelming at times.
It certainly can, but Marx's emphasis on the dynamic nature, a history, and the possibility for transformative change offers a sense of hope, a reminder that we have the agency to shape the future. We're not just passive bystanders.
Right. It's empowering.
It is.
It reminds us that we can analyze the systems around us, critique them, and work towards creating something, better.
Exactly. Which brings us full circle to that question we posed earlier. Can Marxist ideas offer solutions to the challenges of the 21st century? It's not a question with a simple yes or no answer.
Right. There's no magic formula, but what's clear from our deep dive is that Marxism can be a powerful tool for understanding those challenges, for asking the right questions, and for imagining different ways of organizing our world.
It encourages us to challenge those assumptions and critique power structures and to work towards a world that prioritizes things like social justice, human well-being, and ecological sustainability over endless profit and accumulation.
I think that's a vision worth striving for, even if the path to get there is complex and constantly evolving.
Absolutely, and I hope that our listeners, as they continue their UPSC journey and prepared to shape the future of India's role in the world, will keep engaging with these ideas, these tools of analysis.
It's about using those tools to not just understand the world, but to help create a better one.
Well said. And as always, we encourage you to share your thoughts and questions in the comments. And if you found this deep dive helpful, please hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more explorations of the ideas that shape our world.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, everyone. Until next time, keep those minds sharp and stay curious.